Good morning, or depending when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokémon trading card game. And you're listening to PTCG Radio. Now, just as a very quick note, I am recording this on Tuesday, not Wednesday like usual, so if I have missed any big news on the Wednesday, that's my excuse, and if you don't buy it, well, I'm sorry, but it's the actual reason. If anyone's wondering about my YouTube channel, and you can find that if you just go on YouTube and search for PTCG Radio, it is still existing, it is still being used. It's a long, boring story, but there have been continuing technical problems. I have in the past used my home laptop and my work laptop to record them. Both have died. I've got them both fixed, and I'm now in a situation where my home laptop has re-died and my work laptop doesn't yet have the Pokemon trading card game online program, because I need to get a member of the IT staff at work to install it to get around certain privileges, blah blah blah. It's a boring story, but the point is it's coming back. So I'm going to make reference to a deck breakdown or two that I may be putting up on the YouTube channel in the near future, and that is absolutely correct. They will be going on, but the technical problems carry on. The main thing is this weekly podcast keeps on going. So, yeah, thought we'd be happy about that. Now, what we're going to do today, we're going to flick through a few little bits of news, and we're going to go through a few bits of information regarding the tournament which has been going on in the UK in the recent past. I'm going to be telling you which decks have done well, why they've been doing well, which decks may be repositioned for a comeback, etc. And there's even a couple of new decks which I will be telling you about, you lucky, lucky people. So we've already gone through, in the last 3 weeks, we skipped 1 week, but we've gone through Gaia Volcano and Tidal Storm, and we're going to be going through them as a kind of second look when that set hits in the UK, US, Europe, etc. in about a month's time. Now, what is interesting is that we're at this kind of weird stage in the format where we've been going for a few weeks now, a couple of months even, and we're pretty set in terms of list. Phantom Force has been out a while, the decks have been pretty much established, and we're waiting for Primal Clash to come out and really mix things up a little bit, I suppose. So, we have some new things to tell you about, some new pieces of product, I suppose would be the way to put them, which I know isn't always the most exciting thing for everybody, but you need to know this, and I like to be thorough. So there are Primal Groudon and Primal Kyogre collections coming in March. These will include a figure of either Primal Groudon or Primal Kyogre. You probably could have guessed that. And a special holo card of said Pokemon. It's also going to feature 4 booster packs, and in the US it's going to retail for $20. Now, trainer kits are coming. Latios and Latias trainer kits. They are going to feature holos of the 2 Pokemon and 2 30 card decks, along with a how to play guide, a playmat, a deck box, damage counters, a coin, and a code card. This is a cool throwback to in 2004 when Ruby and Sapphire sets were coming out, featuring Latios and Latias. And we're back in the kind of remake Ruby and Sapphire era now, so it's nice that we've got a Latios and Latias set kind of 11 years after the last Latios-Latias little kind of trainer set came out. Those of you that are thinking of trying to equate this to a more recent product, there was a Xerneas and Eviltal half decks that came out a little while ago. These look like they're going to be like that. There's Primal Groudon and Primal Kyogre collections. They're going to have a jumbo card and a holo of one of the 2 Pokemon with 3 booster packs. And in case that wasn't enough, there's going to be a Japanese mini set. Team Magma versus Team Aqua Double Crisis. And this is going to be released in America as 2 box sets. Double Crisis Aqua versus Magma. Each box will be themed after one of the 2 teams, and will have 4 7-card booster packs and a collector's pin featuring Team Aqua or Team Magma logo. There's going to be 28 cards in the set, including 8 holo cards. This is pretty gosh darn cool. There's a new mini Japanese set, and we're getting it. And this confuses me, because when these little kind of mini Japanese sets come out, it doesn't seem like Pokemon, TCPI in the US, etc., can really decide how they want to give them to us. We had Radiant Collection, which was a Japanese shiny collection, which was chucked into Legendary Treasures as an extra for what was largely a reprint set. We had Dragon Vault, which was its own little set which you bought as 3 little booster packs with a promo card, and now this is different again. 4 7-card booster packs and a tin. Now there's going to be 28 cards in total, including 8 holo cards. So you are getting 28 packs. 28 cards in each set. You're probably not getting a complete set. So the question is, how many of these are you going to need to buy in order to get the complete set? Or just, trade with people. And we've started to see some, quite a lot in fact, English version cards of Primal Clash. They've been going into shops early. One, and this does come from a Twitter question I received recently, which I think is worth having a quick look at. The card Teammates. This is the one which is a little bit like Twins, and it reads, you can play this card only if one of your Pokemon was knocked out during your opponent's last turn. Search your deck for up to 2 cards and put them into your hand. And the question I got on Twitter was, does this work if your Pokemon was knocked out from poison? Think something like EXP share, which wouldn't work if it's knocked out from poison. Now, I think the important thing to note here, and we haven't had a proper ruling here, and the general way it goes is that official rulings are not given out until the set actually drops in English. Until the street date. But it reads, you can only play this card if one of your Pokemon was knocked out during your opponent's last turn. And of course, poison does not knock a Pokemon out during the turn. Poison is put on between turns. So at the end of my turn, between turns, the Pokemon takes 1 damage counter from poison, and then after my opponent's turn, between turns, it takes another damage counter. So my understanding, and this will have to be will have to be confirmed by the appropriate people over on Pokegym, but it seems like this will not count for poison. So, if you're playing Hypnotoxic Laser, and if your opponent is trying to use Teammates, and you know they're trying to use Teammates, then what you need to do is try and get a KO through poison, and that's going to stop that coming in. And that was from... well, he's got a naughty name, but his tag was at Pokemon's Battles, both with Zs. So thank you to that chap for sending that question over. I don't always go through every question I get on Twitter on the podcast, but I think that was one that some people may have been wondering, so worth pointing out to you lovely people. So yes, and that's pretty much it in terms of, oh no, tell a lie. The logo and set description for Double Crisis have been revealed. And it reads like this. 2 teams of villains emerge from their hideouts to clash over the fate of the world in Pokémon TCG Double Crisis. Team Aqua brings sheer brawn and willpower, while Team Magma leverages logic, and both are willing to move land and sea to accomplish their goals. While Team Aqua's Kyogre EX rampages against Team Magma's Groudon EX, their rival ambitions could change the home region forever. Now, we don't actually know what this means. Is there going to be a Team Aqua's Kyogre EX and a Team Magma's Groudon EX? Or are we going to be getting new Kyogre EX and new Groudon EX? And remember, I've been far more impressed with the Mega EXs than the regular EXs for those cards. So I, for one, would actually be quite happy if they did release a new regular EX for Kyogre and Groudon, because I love the Mega EXs for both of them. I'm just not a huge fan of the regular EXs for either. I mean, they're not terrible, but, go back to last week's podcast if you want a good run-through. But the regular Kyogre EX has got a decent attack, but I'm really not a fan of regular Groudon EX. So I'd quite like a new one, especially as... quite frankly, I've been going through all of these cards, a lot over the last few weeks for the podcast, etc. And honestly, the card that looks most exciting, I am buzzing over the thought of a Landorus Groudon EX deck. It just seems like a lot of fun for me. It seems like a deck that I could it seems like a deck I could enjoy, quite frankly. It seems like a deck that I could get on board with. So, wouldn't mind having a different Groudon EX. You never know, it could even be reprints, although I think that is unlikely. And I don't think I said this, it's coming out March the 25th. Although, as is pointed out on places like Pokegym.com, these sets have been dropping early lately, so that could well happen again. So, As is usual, I unfortunately was unable to attend Shoreham Regionals and Edinburgh Regionals due to being home for Christmas, and I was unable to attend Sutton Coldfield Cities due to being home for Christmas. And I fear this is becoming a bit of a theme with me lately. It looks like I may be missing London Cities this weekend, although that's not definite yet. I may well be down there. I should be making Plymouth City Championships, I should be making Yeovil City Championships, and I'm going to be making a bunch of the second round of regionals. But unless I hit big on a couple, my world's invite looks in jeopardy. I am sitting at 55 points, 245 away, and I've got, I think, 4 regionals and at least 3 cities I'm going to be going to. Ripley Cities as well is looking quite likely. So, Ripley Cities, Plymouth Cities, Truro Cities, Yeovil City, so I'm going to be making a few cities. I think maybe 4 cities, 3 regionals. But given that I went to 3 regionals and only made 1 top 16 so far this season, I'm not loving my odds of getting through and winning. But I will let you know how I'm getting on, as I always do. But yeah, I've not been making these tournaments because I've been home for Christmas. But I sent out a prayer on Facebook, and would you believe it, lovely people got back to me. So, thank you to Terry Goodacre, to Mal Cameron, Matthew King, Joe Bernard, Jack Old, Charles Barton, and Matt Blower, who combined to give me all the information I need about these tournaments. All of them are, without exception, lovely, lovely people, and I thank them very much for their help. So let's have a look at these tournaments, see which decks did well. These aren't necessarily in order, but I'm not so worried about the order, because all of these tournaments had somewhere in the region of 50 to 70 masters. They were big tournaments. Not only that, but a lot of very good players went down. So I'm going to focus on the decks that made top 8, because, I think Sutton Coldfield Cities this past weekend, you had to go 5-1-1 in a 70-person tournament to cut. So over 7 rounds, you needed 16 points. 5-2 wasn't a good enough record to get you into Top Cut. So these are decks which are doing really, really well. Now, we start off with Edinburgh Cities, and the top 8 looks something like this. Paul Stringer with Virgin, Tamal Cameron with Evil Town, Ryan Morehouse with Evil Town, Mark Taylor with Landorus Dustnoir, my good friend Nick Pearce with Seismitoad, and I'm chuffed to bits that he won. He did well with Seismitoad, Alex Dow with Virizion Genesect, Kai Blackburn with Evil Town Drifblim, and Charles Naden Lamb with Donphan. So what we can see there is 4 Evil Tal in a top cut. Now, one thing I should point out, the UK in recent months has been very Evil Tal heavy. So, quite frankly, yeah, an awful lot of Evil Tal. What is interesting is that no Manectric was played. Now, there has been a little bit of Manectric in Sutton Coldfield Cities, which we'll get to in a little bit, but no Manectric played, and Evil Tal just absolutely cleaned up. Now, Tamal Cameron, Ryan Morehouse, these are people who are very, very well established Evil Tal players, and Kai Blackburn is not to be sniffed at as a player. I said for it is, of course, free. I do apologise. Looking outside of that, there's a couple Virizion Genesect, which makes sense. It's always been good, and I would be surprised if it didn't continue to be good. It's got solid matchups against the board. The only thing it really can't beat is Pyroar, and there wasn't a lot of Pyroar at that tournament. We see one Landorus Dustnoir. Now, Landorus Dustnoir doesn't match up particularly well against Evil Tal, but other than that, it's pretty gosh darn good. It saves its KOs quite nicely. It's good against something like Virizion Genesect because it hits for good damage early, and then, the problem with a regular deck against Virizion Genesect is that if you can't KO the Virizion, they retreat to the bench, and then you've really got to concentrate on killing the Genesect. But with the Dustnoir, you can just move the energy onto the Genesect and kill. And I've seen people playing this deck a few times recently, and it's pretty good. It's a fairly straightforward deck. You attack with Landorus, using strong energy and all of that good stuff. And then you go ahead and move the energy around with Dustnoir. Now think about it this way. If you attack with a Landorus, you're doing 30 to the active, 30 to the bench. Now you add on a Muscle Band, it's 50 and 30. Assuming they've got an EX active, you pop a Fighting Stadium down, then you're up to 70-30. You make the energy a strong energy, you're up to 90-30. Now that 30 goes onto the bench, and a lot of time it's not going to do much good. But you're putting 120 damage onto the board for a single energy. 90 to the active, 30 to the bench, 1 energy. Now you get a Dusknoir into play. Let's say, for argument's sake, that you're playing against Rizzy and Genesect, and on turn 1 of the game you get this 90-30, you got 120 damage on the board, and on turn 2 you get a Dusknoir into play. Now, even if they enhanced hammer away the strong energy, let's say you get a second strong energy, you're again hitting 90-30. Well, all of a sudden, you've KO'd that Virizion, and you've got 60 on the bench. But actually, Virizian's got 170 HP, not 180. So, let's move 10 damage off. Now you've got 70 on the bench. Now, we're looking pretty good. You've got 70 damage on the bench, you're attacking for 1 energy, and then you can use stuff with, like, Max Potion, for instance, because you're only attacking for 1 energy. Now, it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. There's not really much else to say about Landorus Dusknoir. You'd probably run a Lucario as well. It goes through resistance, its first attack, which is pretty good against something like Yveltal. But not only that, what a lot of people sleep on with Lucario is, and it's the reason why I personally think it's better than Landorus, it's got a 2 energy attack for 60, which allows you to draw till you've got 6 cards in your hand. Now let's not forget, ladies and gentlemen, that that's 60 if you don't have Muscle Band Fighting Stadium strong energy down. You're not doing 30 to the bench with the first attack, but you are going through resistance, which is good against something like Yveltal. You're also covering your weakness, so if you come across something which is a water attacker, you really don't want your Landorus active, so you bring Lucario EX active instead, who's weak to Psychic. And these decks will often play Hawlucha instead, and Hawlucha is someone I've spoken about a lot. Hawlucha is, I think as close to being broken as we've got. I think I mentioned this on the podcast before, I was having a chat with Luke Sabin, a very good UK player at Manchester Regionals, and he posited that we're going to look back in a year or two when Hawlucha has been rotated and, remember it as a card, how could they have printed that? Why didn't people abuse it a little bit more? It's a basic Pokemon. It's only got 70 HP. It's got free retreat, and it doesn't hit for weakness or resistance. Well, it doesn't hit for weakness, not hitting for resistance. Excellent. 62 in EX for 1 energy, and let's not forget Muscle Band or Silver Bangle, Strong Energy, and Fighting Stadium. You can legitimately be doing 100 damage for 1 energy on the first turn of the game. 120 damage with a Strong Energy Muscle Band Fighting Stadium. That's absolutely crazy. Even if you don't have a Fighting Stadium or Strong Energy, all you need is a Silver Bangle. You're 2-hit KOing every EX in the format because it doesn't get resistance. So you're doing 90 to everything. Do bear in mind, it doesn't one-hit a Thunderous. Sorry, Andrea. I don't think Andrea Zion listens, but yeah, I did that against him in Aberdare Regionals. That was mean of me. So that's how this deck kind of works. And it's, Mark Taylor managed to get himself to top 8 in a pretty competitive regional with that, so quite frankly, good on him. Donphan is seeing a dip in play lately. And to be honest, the main reason for that is people are ready for it. People are teching against it. People are getting ready for it. People are playing things like Morlesandra to drag the Donphan active, or they're playing counter decks. One thing which I find very interesting, we'll get to Sutton Coldfield Cities in a minute, but Tom Hall went ahead and won Cornwall Regionals with Donphan. He didn't play Donphan at Sutton Coldfield Cities. He played a fighting deck, but he didn't play Donphan. And I think that's incredibly... I think that says a lot. When you've got a player who's done very, very well at a tournament with a particular deck, who then doesn't keep playing it, I think that's pretty interesting, to be honest with you. I think that says quite a lot. So yeah, interesting. Moving on then to to Shoreham Regionals. So this was the very next day. So, on the one hand, it is interesting that you could have metagamed based on the previous day's results. On the other hand, a day turnaround is often not long enough, given that the people who played at, both would literally have had to leave Edinburgh Regionals. Edinburgh I mean, look them up on a map of the UK if you don't know. But Edinburgh is in Scotland, which is right up at the top of the UK, and Shoreham's kind of down a little bit on the south coast. It is a long distance between the two. It is a mission to get from one to the other in one day. Although kudos to the organisers for having them on consecutive days, so people could have gone to both if they so wished. Now, I have actually got these in order, so thank you very much to Matthew King, who... I mean, you'll find out why in a minute. He probably knew the order and gave it to me so quickly, but kudos to him. You know, the fact that we've got the order here. So, top 8 in no particular order. Christopher Tarrant with Pyroar. Remember, there were a couple of Rizzy and Genesect that did well in Edinburgh. Nathan McClue with Donphan. It's hanging about. Alan Graham with Pyroar, so again a little bit more Pyroar here, and Joe Bernard with Landorus, Lucario, Drifblim. So I'm not going to go through this deck in a huge amount of detail. I've just talked a lot about fighting, but essentially here you take away the Dusknoir and you put in Drifblim. Drifblim for a single energy, a colourless energy, so you can put it into any deck. You couldn't use strong energy, but basic fighting would work. 50 damage times the number of special energy in your opponent's discard pile. I.e., you're playing against things like Donphan, for instance. You get rid of all their strong energy and double colourless, which all Donphan decks play, and then you can hit for an insane amount of damage very, very easily. In third, we saw Jovan Roberts with another Donphan, and Emmanuel De Silva with Yveltal. In second, we saw Shyam Bardwar with Virizion, Genesect, Drifblim. I believe that's the chap I played in... Aberdare Regionals. He was a lovely chap. I very much enjoyed our game. And the winner, Matthew King. See why he gave me the information? No, I'm joking. He's a lovely chap. With Yveltal, Raichu, Charizard, Seismitoad. So you can see Matthew's kind of hedged his bets there. He's gone for a very teched out deck. Now, I am willing to suggest, and I may well be wrong, that he's kind of cut a little bit of consistency here or there for options. But you've got Raichu for the mirror match, you've got Charizard for Virizion Genesect, and you've got Seismitoad for a bunch of things, including, you know, Donphan, or just, as I've talked about with Yveltal decks in the past, just putting one Seismitoad in, it slows the game down. It's also really good if you play against a Seismitoad, because if you Seismitoad them first, then you can really get some good stuff going here. And what can we say about this? We've got a couple of Pyroar, but as I've said, Virizion Genesect continues to be a force, so I don't think it's particularly surprising that that hangs about. We've got a couple of Donphan, and that's seeing a little bit of a dip in play. It really was kind of owning recently, and it's not seeing quite the play it used to, but there's a lot of people countering it. The fact that people are ready for it and it's still making top 8 at UK regionals really shows that it's a good deck. And the thing about Donphan is we're at that stage in the format where the format's been around a while. Donphan's been around a while. People know how to build Donphan now. People are good at building Donphan. People are good at playing Donphan. They've had a lot of practice. So on the one hand, yeah, Donphan's been around a while, and that means that people know how to play against it. People also know how to play it. They know how to build it. So, you know, it carries around. Landorus, Lucario, Drifblim, what I find interesting is that for a long time these straight fighting decks really weren't doing very well. But at 2 regionals in a row, we have one top 8 with Landorus Dusknoir, and we have one top 8 with Landorus Lucario Drifblim. Now, I think that's very, very interesting. People are starting to get a grip with these fighting decks, and I think people are kind of just paring them down, but finding one partner, and that seems to be the way to play these fighting decks. Just go with Dusknoir, or just go with Drifblim, and really go for kind of pure consistency. They're hard-hitting decks. Landorus and Lucario both hit for a single fighting energy. And of course, you've got Hawlucha, who, as previously discussed, is potentially a little bit broken. Only one Yveltal, compared to 3 in Edinburgh. Whether that's fear of it being countered or just different players, I honestly don't know, but I find it very interesting that so kind of few of them are being played at this particular tournament. And then Yveltal, Raichu, Charizard, Seismitoad we've talked about. What I do find interesting, 2 of the top 8 decks here, Joe Bernard's Landorus Lucario and Sham's Virizion Genesect, played Drifblim. And one of the Yveltal, Kai Blackburn's in Edinburgh, he played Drifblim. And Drifblim is becoming a really kind of broken card at the moment. And I don't know if that's an exaggeration, but if you think about it, you've got all these fighting decks that really revolve around strong energy, and you've got Donphan, which has strong energy and double colourless. Seismitoad is all about double colourless energy. Yveltal decks are going to play 4 double colourless energy. Virizion Genesect decks are going to play plasma energy. I don't think there is a single deck in the top 8 of Edinburgh or Shoreham that wouldn't have played special energy. The other one we've got there is Pyro, and Pyro plays double colourless energy in order to fuel Pyro's attack because it's fire double colourless, and you can go with just fire using Blacksmith, but it slows the deck down, and that's not what you want with Pyro. You want it to be going as fast and consistently as possible. So I think there's a lot of scope here for really saying that Driblim is an incredibly strong play. I, for one, have been playing around with Seismitoad Driblim. Now, if we look at the top 8 for both of these regionals, and we look at the amount of abilities, in Edinburgh, we've got one Dust Noir deck, but that's a Landorus deck. If you get a decent start with Seismitoad, you're beating that, because they're weak to water, and you've got your lasers, and lasers are really good against Landorus decks. And of course you're cutting off all of their trainers, so it's going to be hard for them to get a Dust Noir out anyway. And most Dust Noir decks now do play a Dusclops, so they can manually evolve it, but it takes a little bit of time. And then there's Virizion Genesect, but in the nicest possible way, Seismitoad Garbodor isn't beating Virizion Genesect, so you don't need a Garbodor there. Moving down into Shoreham regionals, and you got the same thing. There's a Virizion Genesect, but like I've said, you aren't beating that regardless. And there's a couple of Pyroar, but you're going to get some early KOs on those Pyroars. And then, okay, you don't have the Garbodor to shut off Pyroar's ability, but you've got Drifblim. So you can get rid of their DCEs, and they can, and then you can kill them with Drifblim, or they don't use DCEs, and they're slow enough that your lasers and Seismitoad are going to be doing a little bit of damage. The point I'm making here is that as well as Drifblim becoming more important due to the reliance on all the top decks on special energy, I think there's a big argument to be made here that Garbodor is becoming a lot less important. Now, whether that then opens up the door for decks based around abilities, that's a little bit Inception-y, but I think there's an argument there. But I suppose what I'm doing here is I'm going through a couple of tournament results in the UK, and these are fair, from what I've seen around the internet, these are not particularly unusual. But then what we can also do here is start drawing conclusions. One of my conclusions is Drifblim is a really strong play, and one of my other conclusions is that Garbodor at the moment potentially is not a particularly strong play. And that brings me to the point I was making, which is I've been playing around with Seismitoad Drifblim. I'm already playing Enhanced Hammer, Garbodor's not doing very much for me, so why don't you bring in something like Drifblim? Because against Yveltal, Garbodor's doing nothing, Drifblim might get you the last couple of KOs. 3 DCE in the discard pile, 1 Muscle Band, boom, dead Yveltal. In the mirror match against Seismitoad, your Garbodor ain't doing jack. But if you can take down a couple of their DCEs, you're 2-hitting with Drifblim. If you can take down all 4 of them, you're 1-hitting with Drifblim, which is pretty gosh darn good. Against Virizion Genesect, now Garbodor, yes, Garbodor does stop Genesect using Red Signal, and Garbodor does turn off Virizion's ability, meaning you can hit it with laser damage, but in all honesty, ladies and gentlemen, it's still not enough to win. If you have a great start, you're going to beat them anyway. If you don't, you're not. But Drifblim, if they have to discard a couple of plasma, or you can get rid of a couple of plasma, then Drifblim can do a little bit of damage for you. Buy you some time. And also, it's an attacker that isn't Seismitoad, whereas even if you've got Garbodor out, you're still attacking with Seismitoad. So, I think there's a few things we can draw. And then moving into Sutton Coldfield Cities, again, Sutton Coldfield Cities, there's not a huge amount to say here. But there are some interesting ones. We have Yveltal, played by Tamal Cameron, Terry Goodacre, Adam Hawkins, and Charles Barton, which is crazy. Rounding out the top 8, we had Joe Bernard with Zapdos Manectric, Rhys Williams with Yveltal, so sorry, there were 5 Yveltal, and Scott Simmons with Virizion Genesect. So we've got 5 Yveltal, a Zapdos Manectric, a Virizion Genesect, and Tom Hall's Machamp deck, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. So, Joe Bernard Zapdos Manectric, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail here. I'm going to do a YouTube video on it if I can get my technical problems sorted, and I'm going to talk about it on next week's podcast. I think Manectric deserves its own podcast. It's starting to see a little bit of play. Similarly, Charles Barton's Eviltal list was Eviltal with Manectric, but again, I'm going to leave this till next week's podcast. We're going to have a go through this on next week's podcast, because we're not going to have time today. We're already at half an hour, and I want to have a quick chat about Tom Hall's deck. So, Eviltal, absolutely huge. Manectric starting to see a little bit of play. Given that Eviltal was doing very well in Edinburgh and had a showing at Shoreham, it may have only had 2 spaces in the top cut in Shoreham, but it won in Shoreham. And to be honest, 5 top cuts over 2 regionals is pretty gosh darn good. Not to mention there were 5 Eviltal in Sutton, so people are starting to rebel and play Manectric, like Charles Barton's Eviltal Manectric and Joe Bernard Zapdos Manectric, and this is what we call metagaming, and I know a lot of you already know this, so I apologise if I'm being a bit too simple here. Everyone plays Eviltal, so let's play something that beats Eviltal. Again, Zapdos Manectric will go in a minute. The only thing I will tell you is, Manectric is weak to fighting, Zapdos is resistant to fighting. Not a coincidence. But the winner of Sutton Coldfield Cities was Tom Hall. A guy who you've heard me mention on the podcast many, many times before, because Tom Hall wins a lot. Now, I have been having a bit of a chat with him about his deck this evening. He's a lovely chap, and I'm not going to tell you everything about his deck. That would be rude. But what I am going to tell you is that he considers Machamp to be, in his words, a legit deck. I think he means legitimate. But essentially, there's a couple of cards here which people are massively underutilising. One is Focus Sash. Focus Sash is a tool that says if the fighting Pokemon this card is attached to has full HP and would be knocked out by damage from an opponent's attack, that Pokemon is not knocked out and its HP becomes 10 instead. Then discard this card. Now, it does mean that if your opponent has poisoned you with a laser, you're going to die anyway. But if they don't have a laser, you can't be one-hit KO'd. How amazing is that? Okay. Now, the main attackers here, you're going for, Landorus and Lucario. And I'm not telling you about Tom's deck specifically here. I'm telling you about this kind of deck. It wouldn't be fair for me to talk too much about Tom's deck in his list. But you're going to be attacking with Landorus and Lucario, as these fighting decks tend to. Now, Mewtwo's going to one-hit KO. And they're not going to with Focus Sash, but generally you're not getting the one-hit KOs against these Pokemon. 70 HP Horlicher, on the other hand, oh yes, you are one-hitting Horlicher. Let's say, for instance, if I'm Seismitoad against something like an Eviltal, if I'm playing Horlicher against something like an Eviltal, I put, a Fighting Energy and a Fighting Stadium down, I'm hitting 100 with Horlicher because the resistance is ignored. Now, my opponent is going to be able to one-hit KO my Horlicher back with Eviltal very, very easily. Except I've got a Focus Sash. Now, yes, if they have a Startling Megaphone or they have a laser, then they're going to kill my Horlicher. But unless they do, they're going to put my Horlicher down to 10 HP. I can then do another 100 to that Eviltal and KO, and then they KO my Horlicher. But if I'm KOing their Eviltal for 2 prizes, and they're KOing my 1 energy Horlicher for 1 prize in 2 hits, it's not even close, quite frankly. Not only am I only giving up 1 prize, but I'm only using 1 energy on Horlicher, and they're going to be using at least 2 energy on Eviltal. So, yeah, it's going to put the prize trade in your favour massively. Now, the other card that needs to be used in this particular deck is Machamp. Now, this was a card, it was a pre-release promo, it was a card that everybody loves, and it's a card that everyone went, that's pretty good. And then a few people made a few bad lists, and everybody kind of ignored it. But it's got the attack Fighting Fury. Each of your fighting Pokemon's attacks do 20 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. Yeah, that's pretty good. Now, Machamp himself, for free fighting energy, does 80 damage, and damage done to Machamp is reduced by 40 the following turn, and it's got 150 HP, which means you need to do 190 to one-hit KO it, but then, of course, it's got Focus Sash on. But essentially, Machamp does 20 extra damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. So, you can use Focus Sash here, because you don't need Muscle Band. Let's say you've got a Fighting Stadium down, 2 Machamp on the bench and a Strong Energy. You're doing 80 extra damage per turn. Let's say, for argument's sake, you get 3 Machamp on the bench, and that's a lot to ask, but let's say you do. That's an extra 60 damage. Then you get a Fighting Stadium down. That's an extra 80 damage. Then you get a Strong Energy down. That's an extra 100 damage. A Hawlucha with 2 Strong Energy, 3 Machamp on the bench in a Fighting Stadium, is doing 180 for 1 energy, and if he's got Focus Sash, you're not one-hitting him next turn. Now, obviously, it's going to take a lot to get 2 Strong Energy onto a Hawlucha and 3 Machamp on the bench. I'm giving you a best-case scenario to see the power of this deck. In reality, you're going to have a Fighting Stadium down and a Machamp. In reality, and a Strong Energy. That's still an extra 60 damage, bearing in mind you're going to be using Focus Sash to try and stop being KO'd. Machamp does the work of Muscle Band, except it stacks, by which I mean you can use more than 1 Machamp ability per turn. You're using Focus Sash, you're not getting KO'd as easily, you're putting the prize trade in your favour, and you're doing a lot more damage nice and quickly. That, ladies and gentlemen, is pretty gosh darn good. And that's all I'm going to tell you about this week. There is London Cities this weekend. If I can make it down, I will. If I can't, I won't. But I will still bring you the result next week anyway. The format is wide open and settled, and I love that. On the one hand, we know Virizion Genesect is good, and we know Yveltal is good, but fighting decks are starting to come out. Manectric is becoming good because of Yveltal. Garbodor's dying out. Driblim's coming in. Hopefully, I've not just told you these results, but I've given you some insight through these results and kind of shown you what you can learn from these results. That was the aim of today's podcast, and I hope that's what I've done. Given you a few ideas of decks you can try or changes you can make to your existing decks, and just giving you some information you can use to give you a bit of a leg up in future tournaments. As always, if you want to get in touch with me, you can tweet me at the Wassy, or you can email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk. If you're listening on SoundCloud or Twitter, then as always, all you need to do is just drop a comment down below and I will pick it up and get to it as soon as possible. Next week I'm going to be back telling you about more tournament results and more new decks, and we've got some decks to think about next week. I'm going to be telling you about Manectric based decks, and there are a couple of them which I think we need to be thinking about. And I'm going to be telling you about a new way that people have gone about playing Seismitoad, but again, let's worry about that at another time. It's not something we need to worry about too much for the time being. Thank you very much for listening. Look after yourselves till next week. My name's Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.